Daffodils in the morning freeze, the color of crocus calling forth spring, hyacinth poking up in frost-hard mornings, the quince bursting forth, snowdrops hunched over themselves, the flowering plum and crab trees. All of these push up and out of the earth because they can do nothing else. Their life is to follow something instinctual, primal, seasonal. This is resilience. Thinking of resilience, a phrase that comes to mind is to bounce back from. But we never bounce back to normal. Like a Super Bowl when thrown, our path to resilience is random and sometimes out of control. There is no return to the old status quo. There is a new normal being created. One definition of resilience is a strong and speedy return to the original form after being bent or compressed. A return to normalcy. People talk about resilience as, quote, the speed with which one recovers from an event or trauma. Speed? Really? Normalcy? Really? Nothing is normal. We do not recover our former selves. We put together new ones. We incorporate and reorient our lives that we may go on. There is a return to life, but not a return to life the way it was prior to the precipitating event. There is no return. There is only a moving forward. To be resilient is to be changed. Resilience often comes in the aftermath of trauma or crisis, some event, the breaking down of a wholeness that lies in shattered shards all around a life. Resilience is the reshaping of a wholeness with all the cracks showing, the shards reconstructed. Something happens. A world constructed that was familiar, that was the present and the presumed future, becomes foundationless. It has no meaning. It makes no sense. It is a sleepless dream. There is no clarity, just an endless unknowing. Resilience carries with it the undertone of strength and courage, persistence and determination. And it isn't always pretty. Sometimes it is scrappy or raw or held together by threads as vulnerable as those that the spider weaves. There's no blueprint for it, no map, no right way to enter it. And the thing about resilience is it isn't a choice. It's often only the only option that is given a person or persons who have experienced something or gone through something, and it is powerful. It is a survival tool, and it is a jumping off point into something new. Now, just as an aside, if some of those words sound familiar, it's because 30% of you actually read the newsletter, and some of those words were part of the newsletter. I encourage you to up the 30%. Now, moving right along. Got a lot of announcements hidden today, right? So here's the other thing about resilience. I don't think that we humans come pre-programmed with it. It doesn't get handed out at our creation. We learn it in real time. We develop a capacity for it. You can't practice for it, though there are lots of practices, such as meditation and exercise, all these now you got to take care of yourself things. When you're like, really? The truth is, some of those things can help. And sometimes we have to be led to resilience by another, for we have no ability to find it on our own. So resilience follows an event, an experience, an assault, a crisis, an injury to the heart or mind or body or soul. And sometimes only maybe one of those areas is affected, and other times all of them. What causes the need for resilience can be sudden or long and drawn out. Think of prisoners and torture. Immigrant children at our southern border ripped apart from family and anything familiar. Think back to 2008 and how over the course literally of one weekend, from a Friday to a Monday, people lost their livelihoods, their homes, and financial security. Think about persons who in a snap become critically injured in some sort of accident. Think of finding out that your beloved no longer wants to be in relationship with you and wants out. Think of being turned down for every job you apply for. Think of the sudden death of a loved one. Think of those who find themselves chronically homeless. Think of long-term caregivers, maybe for parents or other family members. Those who find themselves bankrupt due to a medical emergency and lack of insurance. Think of those who have lost everything to addiction. The list is endless. What they all have in common is that they all feel as if they're not survivable, that there's no way to come back from them. And yet, impossibly, moment by moment, every second of every day, people are doing this across the globe. The writer S.C. Laurie describes the survival, the resilience, the return to her life this way. She writes, "A lot of ugly beliefs come up through words like, I can't cope with this, I can't manage, this is too much for me. It was on repeat through the water leaving my eyes. I've begun the process of shedding, of honest, painful shedding, where you stop not talking, and you stop forcing or disciplining yourself to say the things you are scared not to say. And you just give the fear words so that it all doesn't need to stay inside anymore. I kept saying things like this over and over, and then I would whisper underneath it all, but I will, because we always do. So many things we feel we won't get through, and still we do. We show up. We even drag ourselves through it, knees scraping across the glass of our shattered self-belief, and still we make it. We get there. In an article titled Resilience, a New Grief Myth That Can Hurt You, author Candace Osifort Russell challenges the slant on resilience that's proposed in a book called Option B, Facing Adversity, Building Resilience, and Finding Joy. And Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant, who wrote this book, define resilience as the strength and speed of our response to adversity. The goal of the strategies they offer is to help people bounce back to normal as quickly as possible. Having suddenly lost her husband at age 47, Sandberg was left with 2 young children, and she was the chief operating officer at Facebook. So she was all about kicking the you-know-what out of option B because option A, her husband, was no longer available. The book takes on grief and resilience in the same fashion as Facebook might. It says that one must, quote, overcome to get the better of it in a struggle or conflict, to defeat, to prevail over. One must recover, to get back, to regain, to get again. Control, to maintain influence or authority over. Over grief and trauma? Really? So Osifort Russell says, all of these terms suggest that grief is a monster in the darkness that we should fear and flee from, or battle and fight against, so that we will ultimately prevail over it to regain control. I get the impulse. But what if we're not all type A personalities with a drive that allows us to fight our way into resilience by overcoming and recovering and controlling? What if we were type A personality, but we're totally incapable of overcoming, recovering, or controlling due to the enormity of our grief or the trauma we've suffered? They're not just things you get over. You can't just box them up and put them in the closet, or in the garage. That saying is, if you haven't opened it for 6 years, get rid of it. It doesn't work that way with these things. and you know this, that those things that we put in the closet will come barreling out when you least expect it. And the only thing about grief that I know for sure is that it has to have its way with us. We have to go through it rather than around it to avoid feeling it. Likewise, you can't just put traumatic events in one's life on permanent hold. They will find the way to push the play button. The writer David White says, "The antidote to despair is not to be found in the brave attempt to cheer ourselves up with happy abstracts, but in paying profound and courageous attention to the body and the breath. To see and experience despair fully in our body is to begin to see it as a necessary seasonal visitation, and the first step in letting it have its own life, neither holding it nor moving it on before its time." And so Osifort Russell suggests a different semantic in which one embraces rather than battles one's way through the experiences which metaphorically bring us to our knees. She prefers the following words: fortitude, the mental and emotional strength in facing difficulty, adversity, or danger, especially over a long period of time. To bear, to carry, to endure. Courage, the ability to do something that frightens you, and mental or moral strength to persevere and withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. And the last one is to transform, to make a thorough or dramatic change in the form, appearance, or character of. How do you like those? A little bit easier? None of it's easy. But this one at least doesn't tell you're crazy for feeling what you feel. She also goes on to say that the fortitude we are expressing, not building, but simply expressing, just by getting out of bed and going to work and tending the children, is something that should be respected and honored. Continuing to live with nothing more to give than hanging on by our fingernails should be seen as an expression of courage and strength. Learning that we have control over much less than we ever thought makes us not only humble, but teachable. And viscerally understanding that nothing in life is guaranteed naturally unleashes gratitude. I invite you at some later point to come back to that paragraph. There are some persons who are so self-contained and reliant that they can find a path of resilience without the company or support of others. Yet in her article, 4 Ways Social Support Makes You More Resilient, Jill Satie states that social support is a factor in individual resilience that is the ability to recover from hardship and move forward in a positive, adaptive way. That resilience is not a stable trait, but fluctuates over time, suggesting that it is subject to developmental or environmental changes, not personal attributes alone. It's kind of what Jones said. We need community. If I have done my math correctly, which is not a given, my Lori, my beloved wife, would you breathe with me? Died 1 month, 1 week, and 1 day ago. And I'm only able to be here before you and with you because of the incredible support and love of an online community that includes elementary schoolmates and colleagues I've never met. I'm only able to be here before you and with you because of a community of friends that go back 30 plus years. Because of colleagues who surrounded me with their prayers and presence All those days we kept vigil while Lori moved through her dying process. I can be here before you and with you because when I called on all angels, they showed up in a very human form. I am here before you and with you because I have been held in love and support by this very dear to me church community and the many church communities I've had the privilege of serving these past 37 years. And because my ability to be resilient in the face of grief is in direct proportion to the circles of love, comfort, and support that I have been shown. Grief is something ultimately that we do alone, yet communities like this one create a container where that grief can be held. My tears are always underneath a very thin surface. My life has been irrevocably changed. I am trying to live into that change. This is what resilience looks like. And this is what community allows and creates. You know, and the other thing about resilience, it's not something that just individuals do. It's something that whole communities do. Consider this time that we are living in. A time that can deplete and demoralize even those who wear those rose-colored glasses. In this country, political demagoguery has become an assault, an insult, and an affront. A political brew devoid of ethics or morality, which in turn has removed decency and truth from the public square. It has taken a toll on our national psyche as well as on our individual spirits. We now know what helplessness feels like. We now know what it is to feel the despair. We now know paralyzing outrage. We know what it means to desperately want to be able to hope, but are too pragmatic to do so. We may find ourselves silently imploring a God we may or may not believe in to get us out of this mess that we're in. It's hard to believe that we can in any way come back from these last 4 years, that we can recover, that we can rectify, that we can rebuild from the ruins of this presidency, if you could call it that. It's hard to believe that our earth can recover from the human destruction of greed to become once again resilient. For some of us, resilience may be a term that seems light years away. And yet, no matter what happens in the upcoming election, we will all be left with the choice. We can give up, or person by person, chosen tribe by tribe, small community by small community, area by area, region by region, resist. Do we insist on living values that are contrary to the mainstream, or do we just put our heads down and mutter, well, if you can't beat them, join them? No, thank you. No, thank you. Thank you. No, thank you. I don't know about you, but I need this community to help me resist, to help me clarify and support me in living out my life with an integrity. And I want to support anybody else who wants to join me in that task. And we all need to be reminded that resistance is a religious value. That resilience from the oppressiveness of despair about the state of our world, our planet, is something that we create together, making it up as we go along. It is a spiritual practice. We need community because the work of resistance, the work of resilience is bone-wearying work. We need a community to lay that weariness down within, to be able to know that someone else will pick up that work until we are able to return to it. We need to dream together. We need to create together. We need to try new things because a survivable future will not be created from the ruins of our past. The coming years are going to require that this community be a community of resistance, resilience, and reconstruction. We cannot allow ourselves the privilege of despair, helplessness, and hopelessness. That hasn't been our denomination's past, and it surely isn't our future. Our current UUA president, the Reverend Susan Fredericks Gray, often says, this is no time for a casual faith. This is no time for a casual faith. So each one of us needs to take this community, our spiritual and religious lives, seriously, for they are the foundation of resilience. Consider what the director of the Eugene Gay Men's Chorus said last night at their concert. He said, we were made for these times. We were made for these times. You know, probably a lot of you read Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, when it came out in 2000. Or if you're like me, you read the sort of Cliff Notes. He maintained it only took 20% of the people to affect change. But you know what? Scientific research since then has shown that it's only 10%. Research says when 10% of the population holds an unshakable belief, the majority of the society will eventually adopt it. And a writer for the publication Grist, a man named David Roberts, says, and what we need in addition to that is intensity. An intensely committed minority can act as a lever that moves larger populations. In other words, it's not enough to hold certain views. We have to act on them and for them. So here's what I'm thinking. What if we, here in this church, committed to being 10%ers? Intensely. A people who committed to living out our values, not only within these walls, but in the public square. And I know that many of you already do this, but think of the power and the possibility to effect change if we all did that. What if we looked at the ruins around us and chose resiliency? What if we came together in small groups to share ideas and strategize and create? What if in these same groups, we let our grief, our despair, our hopelessness express themselves safely in those circles? Because I know that so many of you, of us, aren't just scared, we're terrified. And in some cases, equal parts totally despairing and burnt out. You need to be held in community. I firmly agree with the poet June Jordan, who wrote, we are the ones we've been waiting for. My friends, it's up to us. We're the 10%ers of resistance and resilience. We can be the point, the tipping point for change. My question to you then is, can we be like the daffodils, the crocus, the hyacinth, the snowdrops, the flowering plum and crabtree, resistant and resilient because we can do nothing else, because it is instinctual and primal. May these months ahead be our season of resistance and resilience. May it be so.